Welcome back to Live from Paris, 8:30 here in the French capital. Quick reminder of the stories that we're following for you. A new coronavirus variant, first detected in the UK, could be more deadly than the original virus. So says the UK's Prime Minister Boris Johnson this Friday. The government, though, stressing that the data is still in its early stages. Confirmed by the Senate, Lloyd Austin becomes the US's first black Secretary of Defense. He rose through the Army's elite ranks and marched through racial barriers in a 41-year career. Also coming up in the programme, a crackdown in Russia as authorities detain the aides of the Putin critic Alexei Navalny. This ahead of nationwide protests planned by his supporters on Saturday. Our top story this hour then. Britain's Prime Minister Boris Johnson has announced that the new coronavirus variant, first detected in the UK, could in fact be more deadly than the original virus itself. Well, speaking earlier, Johnson said there was some evidence that the new variant could be linked to a higher death rate. The data then coming from experts on the new and emerging respiratory virus threats advisory. That's a group which is keeping the government up to date with all things related to coronavirus. Let's take a quick listen to the Prime Minister Boris Johnson speaking earlier this evening.
We've been informed today that in addition to spreading more quickly, it also now appears that there is some evidence that the new variant, the variant that was first identified in London and the South East, may be associated with a higher degree of mortality. It's largely the impact of this new variant that means the NHS is under such intense pressure. We have 38,562 COVID patients now in hospital. That's 78% higher than the first peak in April.
Well, let's talk more about this. Michel Goldman is a professor of medical immunology at the Université Libre de Bruxelles. Michel, thanks very much for speaking to France 24 this evening. I'd like to start, if you will, by getting your thoughts on that declaration by Boris Johnson today, saying that this new UK variant could in fact be more deadly. Should we be worried at this stage or wait for further, kind of results and evidence to come in on this?
Well, clearly, we have to worry about this variant. Simply the fact that it's more contagious is enough to be really concerned. Actually, in Belgium, we are taking tough measures to restrict completely travel for non-essential purpose. Now, what has been said by the Prime Minister at some degree of concern. However, mortality can be related to a number of factors. So I think that it's just an additional indication that we should take this very seriously and that it's really urgent more than ever to deploy the vaccination programs as rapidly and as efficiently as possible.
I mean, the Belgium, as you say there, joining kind of chorus, if you will, from EU leaders saying, look, do not travel unless it's absolutely essential. Stay at home as much as you can. I mean, there are those that think once the virus or the variant, whatever mutation it might be, is in a country, stopping travel is maybe not the most effective measure. What do you think about that, Professor?
No, I understand this argument. The point is that now we have to save time. I think that the problem in most European countries is that we are striving to deploy the vaccines. And, each day that we can win on the virus is important. So we use all the measures we can imagine to really save this time while we are deploying the vaccines. So I agree with you that it's certainly not the final answer. Actually, personally, I think, and we know that the variant is already there in European countries, so I don't think that this will change a lot, but it's an additional layer of precaution, I would say.
You touched on vaccines there, vaccinations, which one would imagine will be a major kind of measure to stop the coronavirus. We hope at this stage. Of course, there are, information we're not sure of in terms of transmission. What do you make of vaccination campaign in France? We've seen a lot of criticism in the run-up to it, criticism about how it's been rolled out. Are we heading in the right direction, in your opinion?
Well, those are not easy tasks. I think that what has to be done is really to overcome all the bureaucratic hurdles and also to make sure that the vaccine manufacturers indeed fulfill their commitments. And I think that in Europe we are better organized than in the past, but still not sufficiently. And I think that the new agency that the president of the Commission commit to launch this year for addressing, emergency threats like this one will be extremely important so that we make sure that we are better prepared for perhaps even new variants of this virus and further pandemics. I think that indeed we have the demonstration that we should and we could do much better in France as well as in other countries. I think that, we are still striving, and I think that we need to discuss on a different basis with the vaccine manufacturers to make sure that everything is done to get those vaccines in our people as rapidly as possible.
I mean, we are running out of time, but I'd just like to ask you a final question. We saw at the start of this vaccination campaign a lot of scepticism around it, particularly in France, people saying, well, we're not sure about actually getting this jab. We are seeing slowly but surely people coming around to the idea of wanting to be immunised against it. What do we owe that to? Is it good campaigning, around the vaccine and its efficiency, if you will?
Yes, I think that vaccine hesitancy is not a problem as we speak because everyone now wants to be protected. Still, we must be careful because, one day, and I hope still this year, the pandemic will be better controlled. The disease will become less visible, less headlines in the media. And at this time, you will see the anti-vax will start again. And it will be very important at this time that people remember the situation in which we are today.
OK, Michel Goldman, you are a professor of medical immunology at the Université Libre de Bruxelles. Thanks very much for speaking to France 24 this evening. Well, let's stay with the coronavirus. Here in France, we have surpassed the 3 million coronavirus infection mark. France then this Friday registering 323 more deaths in the past 24 hours. Well, as of Sunday, Europeans wishing to enter the country will need a negative PCR test. That test will need to be carried out 72 hours before departure. President Emmanuel Macron joining a chorus of EU leaders strongly discouraging Europeans from non-essential travel.
From midnight on Sunday, France's borders will be subject to stricter COVID-19 measures. All people arriving at French airports or seaports from another EU country who wish to enter France will be required to present a negative PCR test less than 72 hours old.
Il y a notamment des variations du virus qui rendent la situation plus dure, plus inquiétante, plus contagieuse. Et donc nous avons pris ces mesures en coordination avec nos partenaires européens.
The measures will not, however, apply at land borders, meaning that lorry drivers and some 350,000 border staff will not be required to get tested. It remains unclear whether the government will apply the rules to people travelling to France by train from another European country. In Brussels on Friday morning, passengers were largely in favour of a compulsory test.
S'il faut en faire un pour aller en France, pourquoi pas. Je pense que les gens doivent voyager avec un test. Moi, je fais un test avant de voyager. Parce que c'est une question de responsabilité.
On rentre dimanche, on verra bien, quoi.
Train companies are asking for the same travel regulations to be put in place throughout Europe.
Thalys a déjà dû mettre en place ce type de mesures pour les voyages vers la Belgique et les Pays-Bas. Ce sont des mesures qui étaient à chaque fois différentes et donc pour plus de clarté et de facilité pour nos clients, nous demandons à ce qu'il y ait plus de coordination au niveau européen.
A decree detailing France's new border measures is set to be published on Monday.
In other world news, the US Senate has confirmed President Joe Biden's nominee, the retired Army General Lloyd Austin, to serve as Secretary of Defense. Austin then becomes the first black American to serve in the role. He rose to the Army's elite ranks and marched through racial barriers in a career spanning 41 years. Well, meanwhile, the Senate Finance Committee has overwhelmingly approved Biden's nomination of Janet Yellen as the 78th Treasury Secretary. Supporters saying they hope to get the full Senate approval later this Friday. If confirmed, Yellen would be the first woman to ever hold the job. Well, bringing us more on those nominations, France 24's Ketavan Gorjestani joins us from Washington.
He's a four-star general, a retired four-star general who spent 41 years in the military. Among some of his main positions was commander of the U.S. Central Command. He's a very respected general, and that showed in how he was confirmed. He got a waiver from the House and the Senate because he hasn't been out of the military for more than 7 years, as is required. There were a few Republicans who opposed it on the fact that they want civilian oversight of the Department of Defense, but otherwise it was really a bipartisan waiver, and his confirmation also showed a bipartisan blowout. There were only 2 Republican senators who voted against confirming Lloyd Austin. So it really shows that both Republicans and Democrats are very happy with that pick, and he is also making history in that position because he becomes the first African-American to be a Secretary of Defense. General Lloyd Austin, who is only the second person to be confirmed in Joe Biden's cabinet after Avril Haines, the Director of National Intelligence. And it shows you also how bipartisan the agreement is on having to confirm very quickly some of the top picks for national security. Both Republicans and Democrats agree that they need to push through those confirmations fast. DNI, Secretary of Defense, we're going to see more coming. You mentioned Janet Yellen for Secretary of Treasury. She's also expected to be confirmed very soon, but these confirmations are being delayed, usually at this point in time after a couple of days after inauguration. Administrations usually have more people in the cabinet confirmed, but of course this transition was anything but ordinary.
Well, staying in the US, Democrats say Donald Trump's second impeachment trial is set to begin next week. The House Speaker, Nancy Pelosi, saying earlier she plans to send the article of impeachment to the Senate on Monday. Democrats had pushed for an impeachment trial over Trump's role in the deadly Capitol riots on the 6th of January. Trump is the first president to be twice impeached and the first to face a trial after leaving office. Here's the top Senate Democrat, Chuck Schumer, speaking.
Now, I've heard some of my Republican colleagues argue that this trial would be unconstitutional because Donald Trump is no longer in office. An argument that has been roundly repudiated, debunked by hundreds of constitutional scholars, left, right, and center, and defies basic common sense. It makes no sense whatsoever that a president or any official could commit a heinous crime against our country and then be permitted to resign so as to avoid accountability and a vote to disbar them from future office. Makes no sense.
The Iraqi capital, Baghdad, is still reeling following Thursday's deadly twin suicide blasts that were claimed by the Islamic State group. At least 32 people were killed and more than 100 others wounded in the attack when suicide bombers targeted a commercial district. Well, the attacks have once again exposed gaps within the country's security forces. It was the deadliest assault in 3 years in the capital, which has been relatively calm since ISIS territorial defeat back in 2007. Now, authorities in Russia have begun a crackdown, detaining aides linked to the country's top opposition leader, Alexei Navalny. This is Navalny's supporters plan nationwide marches on Saturday. Last Sunday, Navalny was arrested as he stepped off a plane in the capital, Moscow. He was returning from Germany, where he'd spent nearly 5 months recovering from a nerve agent poisoning that he blames on the Kremlin. France 24's Theo Mertz reports now from Moscow.
There have been more arrests, more fines for Navalny's supporters, Navalny's key allies. There have been more officials coming out and telling state media that these sanctions, these protests are unsanctioned, and that anyone who goes there runs the risk of being arrested. That comes after a couple of days of these kind of warnings, and also pressure on social media companies to remove posts that are sharing information about these demonstrations. And one Russian social media company, Vkontakte, the equivalent of Facebook, has already complied and started blocking posts with information about these protests tomorrow. So there's really a lot of pressure and a lot of increasing pressure on the opposition at the moment.
France 24's Theo Mertz.